Hello, and welcome to Dancing in the Daily, a home for change makers, caretakers, healers, and everyday community builders. Together, we are working to call in more love, joy, and connection into our world. So we are so excited to welcome Dr. Iheoma Iruka. Dr. Iruka is a research professor at UNC Chapel Hill in the Department of Public Policy, a fellow at the Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute, and the founding director of the Equity Research Action Coalition. She is a leading expert on the intersection of race and early childhood education, the author of the book, We Are the Change We Seek, Advancing Racial Justice in Early Care and Education. Today, we are exploring the power of early childhood education to transform society, foster healing, and advance justice. Welcome. Thank you so much, Dr. Iruka, for joining us.
Thank you. And of course, let's go with, our first names. We have our own expertise. So glad to be here with you.
Yes. But I gotta put some respect on your name
Thank you.
It means so much to me that you are a professor, right, doing and focusing on race and early childhood education. I know that being someone who also has a background in early ed, I want to see more Black women doing research, being leaders in this space. And so I want everybody to know, honey, that you put in the work.
I am, yes. With a collective, yes, absolutely.
And we appreciate you. We appreciate you for all the work and the sacrifice, because them doctoral programs are definitely a sacrifice.
That's an understatement. No, but I've been blessed, and I take this privilege seriously.
Yes. Well, you know what? To start out, I actually need to know why early childhood education, right? So it's a field that's really, really overlooked, even in the world of education, right? People are like, don't think about that. So why did you choose to focus on early childhood education?
Sure. I would say it actually chose me. So I say I went to school, went to do my degree from, undergrad at Temple, master's at Boston University, and then went to University of Miami to my PhD. And I feel like I was just trying to uncover, how do I make sure that people of color, those living in poverty, especially Black people, are doing well in school. To boil it down simply, it was just how are they doing well. And I think only by chance that my mentor in Miami, and I just don't work with elementary school, but I never thought about early childhood. I think only when I started doing my work in my doctoral work in Miami did I really begin to, I think, go deeper into the early years. And even with that, I still wasn't committed to the early years really until probably a little bit after that. But I think it really found me, right? Because I was really more about families. And for families, it don't matter if you're early childhood, if you're high school, elementary, college, after that, like if that didn't matter. So for me, I was really more about the family and the roles of family in really supporting children's, healthy development over time. And so I think early childhood really came when I really began to do my work and a little bit of my doctoral work at Head Start. I did my work around Head Start, doing my PhD. But then when I really came and did my postdoc work at the University of North Carolina, really looking at sort of quality improvement systems, Head Start systems, and then really got into the science of child development, how you know things, but then when you really begin to sort of put together the things and then the things that actually happen, and you see the disconnect between systems work and the science, it really begins to, if I'm really trying to support my people, then I got to start as early as possible, knowing at least what I know about the science that I know so far. So I think in many ways, it really found me. And it wasn't that I went out early on to really say, I'm going to do this.
Oh, wow. So take me back to some of your first, research, your doctoral program. You're looking at Head Start, and you said you saw a disconnect between the science, right, and the systems and how they were shaped. What were you observing then?
So my work was really about, so I would say, I want to be blunt and honest in this here, Dancing the Daily, right? So I feel like as you said, I study, issues of race, racism, and early childhood. But I didn't start off that way. I was really trying to basically fix Black families to do better and, so that our kids could do better. That was really the underlying white sort of supremacy lens that I think, was part of that, right? I was really focusing on how do we make sure that family engagement programs like a Head Start, how do we make sure that they work better so that Black families could do better, so that their kids could do better and be ready for school. That was the underlying premise of that work. And so I was trying to really, cover, with Head Start, your federal program, we have all the science about family engagement and support. And so how do we make sure that the program is doing that, right? So I'm trying to uncover, what does it take for families to be confident in how they engage with their child? How do we understand what are the barriers to involvement and engagement? And so really, it was really focusing on trying to, in essence, fix families of who are living in poverty, of particularly Black children, and some of them are Latinos as well. So that was really the essence of it. And I think my work sort of, showed to some extent that families are going to be more engaged when they feel more confident in their abilities to be parents, particularly in meeting the demands of what majority society says they should be doing, right? So if you're like, your kids should be doing X, Y, Z, parents are going to be more involved in doing that if they feel confident in doing that. But then we can unwind all of that and say, why do I have to feel confident in meeting this sort of abstract outcome when those outcomes actually don't make life better for either them or for the children themselves, if you look at the full data? So I would say that I want people to really understand even that my own journey of my own research and my own work, and where it really started with sort of this deficit, really racist sort of idea about Black families and their lack of engagement, and how do we make sure we make it better.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that, because I think, we really can. And I had that similar experience of internalized anti-Blackness, especially in education, right? So I think like education is this amazing space, because I think it's always, been within the US, been a space of like Black resistance through education. And at the same time, it's also can be a space of deep anti-Blackness amongst Black people, right? And so like both of those things can operate, especially because we're constantly trying to prove ourselves, right? And protect ourselves and defend ourselves and justify our existence. And so it's easy to get into that mode of, how do we fix the children and fix the family,
Because you're literally, that's what, I mean, if you think about everybody who's entered education for the most part has been about the achievement gap, right? And it's always the achievement gap that you often hear about has been about, the Black-white achievement gap for the most part, has been the poor kids, the non-poor kids, but it's really been the Black-white achievement gap has been the dominant rationale. And a lot of that really is always trying to fix somebody, right? And it's usually Black people. And so you've been drinking that Kool-Aid since the beginning of time. And I was also drinking the same Kool-Aid. I'm Black. And yes, I lived in poverty too. I was drinking the same Kool-Aid. And so I think it's really, for me, it's also recognizing how do we unlearn those sort of ideologies, and then really make sure that as the work continues, that we recognize it. Because it's almost like you're alcoholic. You got to continue remembering that you're still an alcoholic, right? You might have, you might have gone through, the 12 steps, but you got to continue doing that 12 steps, because it's easy to fall back into that trap of sort of deficit thinking, of anti-Blackness, as you clearly stated. And you're having to actually both fight that and fight society all at the same time, right? That's the work that we all have to do. And I know I got to do it every day. Yes.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. That's such a big deal to hear you, an expert in raising early child education, say you're doing that work every single day. So that's an invitation for everyone, no matter our backgrounds, no matter how smart we are, how much organizing we do, to make sure that we're doing that internal work, that mindset work, that lens and framework work every single day. Thank you so much. Now, I want to ask you as well about your background in developmental psychology, right? Because I also thought that was, interesting. Again, within education research, there's so many approaches, right? People, you can come from sociology, you can come from cultural anthropology, you come from a school of education, like all of these different ways to enter into this research. Why developmental psychology for you, and what lens does that bring to your research?
Yeah, so I feel like that's a unique space, especially in early childhood, right? In early childhood education, you're often in that curriculum, instruction, teacher learning, teacher leadership. And again, really important, because really a lot about early childhood is really about what's happening in the classroom, in the program. But for me as a developmental psychologist, so I did a program, applied developmental psychology in Miami, and really we're trying to uncover processes. We're trying to understand systems and sort of how either the micro system, like the family or the school, how that may be affected by the macro system, like policies, laws, culture, racism. We didn't do a lot of that, I would say, in my program, but obviously wish I did. And now I'm having to learn it myself. but you're trying to really uncover how these various systems that impact children's development, how that's happening and through what complex ways, and how does that also impact children's development over time, right? So before they're born, throughout the life course. And so I think for me, that's why I think bringing that into early childhood allows me to sort of begin to talk about that. We focus so much on the classroom and the teacher, really important, but we have to also understand that there's other things that could impact the way the teacher functions or the way the classroom functions. It could be the neighborhood. It could be the policies you have around who's a teacher. It could be the policy around hiring. It could be the curriculum or assessments that schools are using that they may themselves did not pick. It could be that the
Yes.
state picked it for whatever reason, and now you're forced to use it. If you don't use it, you don't use it well, you get, demoted, fired, whatever. So begin to understand how these various things intersect to impact children. And the more we understand all of that, how that impacts children's development, but also knowing that children, because of development over time, right? From when you're born, there's certain things that you're going to be focused on, like, eating, drinking, and pooping. It's kind of like what you do in the first few years. And then as you continue to move forward, you're now going to be more focused on making relationships and making
Yes.
connections, and you have more language, more critical thinking. So, and those develop over time as well. But even for parents, right? Think about, even as a parent, and myself as a parent, like, I had to develop as well. So even for adults, you're also developing, right, over time, based on the time where you're at. Your job could be impacting how you're developing. The opportunities or lack thereof could impact your own development over time. And so I think what development psychology brings into it is to really begin to unpack some of these invisible processes, these invisible systems that really influence us directly and indirectly. And for children's development, we know that many things impact them directly or indirectly. Like the parent's job could impact children, right? The way a parent is treated at work could impact how they may parent, at home, the kind of stresses they bring, or the kind of opportunities, or the kind of networks, right? So I think it's really to help really sharpen that children's development is not in isolation, right? And that
Mm.
it really is influenced over time through many ways, and making sure that we don't sort of blame and shame either educators, like, oh my goodness, because of you, this kid does not know the A's and B's, or shaming families. It's because of you, this kid is that, like, right? So we need to make sure that we understand how children's development, both cognitive, physical, social, emotionally, all that, how that's actually influenced by many systems and
Hmm.
places, but also recognize that there's certain systems that are really important, like the family is really important. Those early care education programs are really important. So giving them, again, their weight, but not exclusively blaming them or saying, if this doesn't happen, it's because of you, right? So it's really being balancing that whole entire impact of child development.
Yes. Oh, this is so good. Okay, we need to dive into this because I think in the past, certainly, I would say the past 10 years. I remember when I first, was in undergrad and I was interested in early child education, I felt like people mostly were like, why? Why are you doing this? You're so smart. You could do something else.
Yeah.
And in the past, again, over the past 10 years, I've seen increasingly people recognize, oh my goodness, early childhood experiences literally impact someone's entire life, right? Like it impacts our mental, emotional, physical well-being. But can you talk to me, especially from that lens of development, like why should we actually care about young children, right? We overwhelmingly, especially in the United States, we have a society that's very dismissive over young children over that time in life. They're kind of like a tag along, right? Like the way our
Yeah.
society sees young
Yeah.
children. So why should we actually care about them, especially for folks who may not have a young child themselves currently?
That's right. I mean, that's that. So, I mean, let's remember, right? Kids, right? At least the way we set up in the States, right? Kids don't have voting power. So I think just politically, they're like, you don't got voting power, so I don't care. Which is why if you look at the federal investment in children, it's probably about 9% of GDP. Sometimes less than that in terms of how much we invest in children, whether through healthcare or whether through programs like Head Start, et cetera. And so we actually don't use a lot of our gross domestic product on young children, health, social, education, et cetera. So I think that tells us the priority of children. But the reason I think we should care, I think there are many reasons, right? One is that children eventually are going to be your taxpayers, are going to be your caregivers, right? So even if you're like, I don't got no kids, I don't care about no kids, is that they actually are your tax base in the future. Think about the elder who are now need social security and need a caregiver and need all these things. You want your caregiver to have knowledge about child development, or to even have knowledge about how to be empathetic, how to sort
Yes.
of be able to look at new science and make sure that you're being healthy, that your bones are not brittle, that they know how to give you medication. So you want those the young children is going to be your basically your tax base, and for the most part they're going to be your police officers, your fire department, your military folks, your presidents, right? So I think we have to at least on that higher level, the economic side, we have to recognize that. But we also know from the science that those first sort of, like we say, 1,000 days, which is like that infant and toddler years, and arguably even the first 2,000 days, which is really between a prenatal all the way through about age 5, a lot is developing at that point in time that sets the foundation. So think about your language and how you communicate. A lot of those things are set up early, right? So even how you think about yourself, your empathetic sort of lens, a lot of that is set up early. So think about when people are like going to therapy later on, what they bring up? What happened to you as a child? Because a
Yes.
lot of what happens to you as a child really sets that foundation in terms of who you're going to be. It doesn't mean it's fatalistic, like, oh, but it does set up a lot of who you're going to be, how you see the world, how you see people. So we have to recognize the importance of that time, because that's when a lot of neurons are developing, right? The neurons is going to now be developed on top of it when you're adolescent, when you're an adult, because there's different periods when growth is happening. So early child is one of those periods. And then, of course, adolescent during puberty, and then later on in adulthood. So, but early child is your first time. And so if you're not using certain skill sets, then it gets pruned away, right? So if you're not using certain language, think about even when you're learning language. Kids learn new language the best when they're young for a reason. And if you don't learn it by a certain age, it's just harder. It doesn't mean it's impossible, it's just harder. And so I do think that if we want our children to sort of have, good moral character, have, persistence, be good human beings, a lot of that happens in the early years. But also even good health. We have now enough evidence that says if you don't have good health early on, your health later on in life is going to be challenging. And so when the reason why the global sort of society thinks about issues of food and water and shelter is because we know that the children need a lot of those physical things, not just for sort of their physical development, but also for the emotional and mental development, right? The more, if you feel as a young kid that you don't have enough food, you don't feel emotionally and socially protected, you're going to have that level of insecurity that really manifests later on in life. And that really impacts your ability to have a good sort of physical and mental health. It has an impact on you being able to get a good job and be part of the tax paying base, to be honest. Is going to maybe potentially create other kinds of unexpected consequences. And so for me, I think we have to begin to realize that a lot is happening in those early years. Again, it doesn't mean that we
Yes.
keep shifted. It just means that we have to just make sure that we really are loving, protecting, and are forming our young children early in life, because later on it's just going to be harder and it's going to be more expensive, right? And so if you
Yes.
like a good sale, or we like our little Black Fridays and holiday spending, if you don't like to pay full price, it's better to do it early. And so doing it in the early years will save you a whole lot of coins, and we at least what we've projected from a lot of the studies thus far.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Thank you. Thank you. And I want to dive in now to Black children experiences, right? Talk to me about your research and what are you seeing around Black children and their early childhood experiences? And I'm wondering, like at a national level, if there's any themes or any trends that you're seeing in the research, right? But what are our babies? What are their experiences right now in this
Oh my
in
God, I
this
love,
system?
I love our, like I just, that just brings me extra joy talking about Black babies. It's always, I mean, I want to start with a positive about Black babies, right? I got Black babies or off the chain, right? They got jokes to make. Again, think about our young babies, right? Our 3, 4, 5-year-olds, they got jokes, right? They're learning, they're figuring out their body, their mind, their color. They're like, am I even if I'm light skin, am I Black? Right? So and they're making use of their words that they learn. They make up new words. And so I would say that Black children are children, right? They're children. They're pushing boundaries, right? They're learning to read. They're learning to, challenge their body and their mind, right? They're learning to make friends, and also, they also probably being uncomfortable sometimes. So I would say that our Black children are I think doing the best of what they have, right? They have a richness of family. They have a richness of communication. They have a richness of those who love them, even if they're not biologically related. So I think our Black children or surviving under the conditions that America has placed on them, right? So with that said, I think that the concerns that I have for Black children cannot be understated, which is that we still have too many Black children who are dying before the first year of birth, and they also likely to lose a parent, their mother, right, right after, right before, they're born, right? So we have quite a bit of infant mortality, including maternal mortality, which means that kids are dying before their first birthday. We also see quite a bit of children who are also preterm and low birth weight, which predispose them to both biological and social vulnerabilities, whether it's around language deficits, whether it's around behavioral challenges, right? So we know that they're being placed at risk for just preterm and low birth weight outcomes. We know that they're being suspended and expelled and really being excluded in such a brutal way, even as early as 3 months old. I mean, 3 years old. We're actually seeing even data that says even as toddlers. So our 2-year-olds in certain places also being basically thrown out. You call it suspension expulsion, but they're being thrown out. If they happen to have a disability, they're likely to also experience physical restraint, meaning that somebody has restrained your body from moving. Again, we're talking about young children, right? 5, 6-year-olds. So we have concerns about that. We know that the curriculum in the school that they're likely to go to is low quality. Again, based on white metrics, is low quality. So based on Black metrics, it's probably really, really low quality. So we know that they're in these spaces of low quality. We know there's still housing insecurity. Again, the historical vested racism and house segregation. We're seeing quite a bit of unhoused children. We're seeing still the issue of child welfare removal. So I mean, I can go on and on with Black children and sort of the challenges they're being placed on. I also want to be very clear. This is not about families who are lazy, families who don't want to work, right? This is really a sort of a country that has systematically denied Black families and Black people, first, human rights writ large, civil rights, secondly, and then opportunity to thrive, right? We continue to see the manifestation of even housing injustices, right? The fact is that many urban sectors now are literally gentrified, so you can't even afford it to live there. And now if you have to be pushed out into the outskirts, that means that you have to find your way to get to work, because most of the work is going to be in much of our urban sector, right? The kind of positions they get is not flexible. It doesn't provide family medical leave. It doesn't provide full health insurance. And so we are still, I think families and communities, Black communities are still reeling from the continuous systemic oppression and the lack of opportunities that's equitable. And even when families go and get an education, a whole degree, it does not actually come to the same benefits. They're going to have more loans and so they're going to actually owe more on their loans they actually took out. That means they can't pay for it. So there's all this sort of economic vulnerability, and then on top of the social vulnerability and the political push for even being able to have political representation, right? Gerrymandering is a huge thing that impacts everybody at some point. So there's a lot that Black people are still thriving to do, which is still have political representation, still resist all of the social oppression, like, oh, you can't say DI or teach Black history because what is more comfortable. Again, but Black people still continue to find different ways to do that, like the freedom schools are still doing things like, saying we're going to give you books and we're going to have summer schools and after school to teach you about Black history, because that is the first step in literally denying you who you are, just like they took our language. So I think that Black children we're going to have to continue to fight for the full human, not just civil rights, human rights of Black children and their families, because this to me is serious ground that we're in now, when even our own history is being rewritten in the books. And we know in early childhood, they barely are talking about that. And we know these policies are going to sort of throw a cold blanket on that. But I know that our family and our communities are resolute, and you can see them still fighting and writing their elected officials, but still reading at home, having, informal bookstores and things of that nature. So we know that we're going to continue to fight to tell our story unfiltered with whiteness.
Yes. Oh my goodness. So talk to me about some policies, right? So what are some policies that we should be advocating for? When I say we, I'm not only talking about Black people, everybody. What are some policies that we should be advocating for that are going to respect human rights for young children, right? And that are going to advance racial equity in the earliest years of life?
Yeah. So I would say, so back, I think in 2022, I was getting, my time and dates are all messed up in my brain. But in partnership with the National Black Child Development Institute, the oldest civil rights organization for Black children, young children, we put out a report called the Black Child National Agenda. And in that agenda, again, it was the beginning blueprint of what could America do to deliver on a promise for young children. And we framed it through what we call the 3 Ps of protection, promotion, preservation. And in those 3 Ps are policies that we think could be a start, right? So for example, if we think about protection, we need to make sure that civil rights protection are actually happening. So think about even the idea of civil rights, right? You want people to be prosecuted if they're really violating people's, racial rights. We have seen even issues of environmental justice, the fact that we're still seeing factories being built where Black people live. That is a civil rights. That's a civil rights violation that should be addressed, right? The fact that we're still seeing Black children being harmed in schools and being thrown out systematically, to me, is a civil rights violation. So we have to think about policies that we often don't use, but we need to use. Even the idea of policy that says no more Black history, no more DI. But for a group that has been denied full access to education, now you're denying me more inequitable access to education. That's a civil rights violation in my book. And I think people need to read civil rights and say, how do we make sure that our schools are ensuring that children feel safe psychologically in schools, right? And that
Yes,
includes the kind of
yes.
curricula, assessments, and teachers that we have in these schools to make sure that our kids get what they actually rightly deserve. So I would say one of those really around civil rights protection writ large, and ensuring that children are not being suspended because a teacher felt like, oh my goodness, I'm afraid of you because you're a 48-month-old and I'm scared. So I think we have to just balance out, how do we use exclusion policies in many ways. Around sort of the promotion side, we want to make sure that we continue to focus on issues of health promotion and wealth promotion. We can talk about poverty till the cows come home, but what we do not have is wealth. The Black
Mm,
wealth gap is massive, right? The
mhm.
fact is that the median wealth for Black people is about $9,000 compared to $150,000 for a white family. That is humongous gap. And the
Mhm.
reason for that is that we don't have access to wealth generation like housing, right? Think about all the housing that they stole and took. We don't have that anymore, right? All the racial discrimination in housing. We have to think about those kind of housing issues. We have to think about business ownership and how do we support Black-owned businesses, Black-owned institutions like even HBCUs. So how do we sort of promote health and also wealth? Right? What do we do about the health disparities that we're seeing across the board, from infant mortality to maternal mortality to even like early intervention? Even that, we know Black kids are less likely to be identified and less likely to get access to resources that meets their early intervention needs. And then
Yeah.
finally, it's around preservation. Like, we have to remember that the Black community is a heterogeneous group, right? We are, we have obviously our descendant of enslaved people, right? But we also have obviously others, whether it's from Africa, the continent directly, whether it's from our Caribbean, but or even from Afro, the Afro, so like Latin community. So we are a really rich group, and we have to figure out how to make sure that we are preserving our languages, our culture,
Mhm.
our institutions, right? We need to continue to do that. And part of that I will argue is reparations is one that we will argue is one that is not discussed enough, right? Again,
Mhm.
I would say let's not fight in the who gets to have reparations. I will argue myself personally that I think those that are in descendant of enslaved people should have the first go at the reparations, right? They like we have to repair the damage that has been done. Like, we got to start with like repairing the damages and that has been done on American land against those descendants. So let's address that. So I think reparations, whether directly or whether through making sure that they're able to have access to education, to
Right.
health, economic, but I would say direct reparations. I don't want to do indirectly. Don't give me something indirectly. I want, if you damage my house, I don't want you to give me a bus card. I want you to fix my house, right? So I
Yeah.
would say so reparations is one of those big ones, but also things like even the workforce, making sure that children have workforce that are well trained, well compensated, but also it's aligned with their cultural racial groups, right? And even the curriculum, make sure that they're African centered. So I do think that there are things that we can begin to focus in on that really meets the need of Black people as a start. There's so much more I could say, but I would say if we can begin to protect our children, promote their health and wealth, and preserve the best of who we are, from our language, the way we communicate, our buildings, our institutions, then we're going to be better off today than we are currently.
Yes. Oh my goodness, that was so rich. That was so rich and so important. I'm interested as well. I know you do some great work around, culturally sustaining pedagogy, right? And I think when we think about the early years, sometimes it can be hard for folks to imagine what could culturally sustaining or culturally responsive pedagogy look like in the earliest years. And so I'm interested in that, but I'm also interested in kind of like what can well-being look like for young children, right? Within certainly school systems, but also family and community systems. Like, paint a picture if you can of like this, what could it look like if our communities and our families and our schools just loved on, and created these spaces for Black children to thrive.
I feel like, the one word, maybe that's just the word I'm feeling today. I feel like the one word would be just joy, right? Like both where kids are able to exude joy however they have it, but also people find joy in them being there, right? I think about Baba Acer Hilliard, right, a great scholar who passed many years ago, but often talked about just the genius of Black children, but also really that you have to love Black children, not just like love and hugging kids, but like really love the essence of who they are, really love them, that you're willing to protect them on such a deep level, willing to make sure that policies and programs are not sort of making their own experiences invisible, or not just creating sort of these systems and programs that don't really attune to who they are as people, as full humans, right? And so I feel like, to me, critically, culture responsive really is like, you have to sort of see those that we have not seen, right? To value who they are. When people think about, oh, who has culture, they think about everybody else. They think about the Latino community got culture, the Asian community got culture, the Native people got culture, Black people, you just got enslavement. And I think that and to me, that is one of the biggest problem we have, is that when people don't know, you actually stolen our culture. You see it every day, right? Think about all the songs you hear, every commercial, all the outfits, the hair, every artistic thing. A lot of it has literally both African or Black roots to it. And so for me, part of culture responsive or sustaining practice, that we have, first of all, we as Black people, we need to know who we are and not allow others to tell us who we are, right? We are more than enslavement, right? Like, yes, we can say that people were, a group of people were brought here, not of their free will. And that's something important that we have to continue to acknowledge and speak true to. But we also have to acknowledge that there's a history before that. There's a whole place you come from before that. And the more that we allow colonialism and white supremacy to take away our thirst to want to know our people, that in of itself is a problem. So I think that we have to, part of culture responsibility, you have to know what the culture is, right? If you don't even know what it is, you can't do it in the classroom, right? And it doesn't have to
Yes.
be, you don't have to
Yes.
feed it to kids every day, but it could be through the books, the music, the saying, the way you move, the way you do your hair, why you do your hair like this, right? So I think the more that we understand like even the idea of the Afro, there's a whole African history around it that we all don't know about. So I think the more that we can really understand who we are, and gain what has been lost through sort of white supremacy and colonialism, the more we can actually do culturally responsive and culturally sustaining practices that in many ways brings joy, right? That allows our kids to just be able to foster and to be happy. Like, look, I see myself. I literally, think about other kids who are just joyful going to school, because they don't have to think about it, because everything is made for them.
Yes.
Imagine if you can create a space that's made for Black kids, because I believe you can create a space for Black kids. I believe that every other kid would thrive, because that means that educator now understands how to see people who are often not seen. So if you create a space for Black kids, you're like, I know how to now go find information that has been stolen, that has either been stolen, either forgotten, either rewritten, right? I know how to go find that information and build it into my classroom in seamless ways. If I can do it for Black people, I can do that for Latino people, Asian people, Native American people. Like, I could do all that without having to work hard for it. And so for me, I think part of culture sustain is really about educators looking at who am I not centering here? And how do I do that in a way that says, you know what, I know that I've been drinking the Kool-Aid of white supremacy, of racism, of colonialism. How do I sort of correct that in the way that I also engage with my children, the way I engage with their family, in the way that I see their communities, right? Because we all have biases, like we all have it. Like, let's just be blunt about it. But it's how do we become conscious of it, and then how do we make sure that it doesn't permeate in different ways that we communicate, the kind of expectations we have of kids, the way we see different behavior, the same behavior but differently because of the skin color that the kid is
That's
in.
right.
So we have, I think that to me, part of culture responsive is really about what do we know about
Mhm.
our own culture, and the more we can discover that, the more we can do it in a way that is just honoring of that brilliance, and really of that joy and that love of that community.
Mm. I'm also curious about, innovations and strategies that you've been witnessing in the early childhood sector that are giving you some hope and some optimism of, for our Black children. I think one of the things that I love about early childhood, especially when I think about Black early childhood educators, is just the creativity that you witness. I always tell people like Shirley Chisholm was an early childhood educator. There's just this powerful leadership and creativity that you see amongst Black educators, but even more widely, I think folks have been doing some interesting work. What have you witnessed? And also, you're doing some really interesting work that I want you to talk about as well, right? But like, how are people being subversive right now? How are they being creative? How are they being innovative to advance racial equity and well-being for Black children?
I feel like one thing I feel like I'm seeing more of is early educators, particularly Black ones. I think just creating spaces, like just say, you know what, I know that I think for them it's like they know that our children in some ways are not being treated well and fairly, but they also know that early care education doesn't pay well. And I see them say, how do I create more spaces, right? It could be that maybe I partner with my friend over here that we create a whole bigger space, right? So from a home that could hold 6 kids, we can create something bigger. We can hold more kids, right? Because they're like, our kids need to see us, right? We're going to give of ourselves a little bit so that our kids can see us, because we know how important the early years are. We're going to actually make sure that we expand the opportunity. Other things I've seen is kind of the bartering and how they engage with families and be like, look, Miss Smith, you got to go over here. Don't, if you're trying to get this kind of like vegetables or fruit, you got to go over here. Like, so even to me, it seems so simple, but it really is like, even that knowledge of information about like, make sure you get your COVID thing over here. Make sure you go get this over here. Baby girl needs her hair. I can see her hair needs to do this, right? So to me, I feel like I love the familyness, if I can use that term. That's not a term, but like that level of like, I feel comfortable enough that I am going to share with you things that I think could be helpful to you, that has no judgment to it, that it may not even help your kid, but it's going to help you, or maybe help your partner or whatever. So to me, those sharing of knowledge, of resources, of information, of social capital, to
That's
me,
right.
I feel like that's the thing that we know is so us, right? And that it's not about competition, right? Is that you, in some ways, you can say, I'm going to compete with this other childcare provider and try to get this, but no, it's like we're trying to work together, figure out how do we make sure that they got the childcare before school, the after school, the parents can go to work, don't have to rush through the traffic to get here, so they don't get penalized. So even seeing the ways that early educators have been sort of, I think, flexible has been really helpful. But I feel like the one thing I also want to recognize that early educators, particularly the Black ones, I think have taken the time and moment to finally say, we need to take care of ourselves. Right. So
Mhm.
when some of the dollars that was coming down from the federal government, like stabilization grants, they're like, you know what, I'm going to take this money and actually create a retirement account for myself. Right. They've never ever had that, because
Yeah.
they are now realized, and they're telling their parents too, look, if you don't got a retirement account, make sure you get that retirement account. That they now are seeing that they have to take care of themselves, because they realize if something happens to me today, either my family's gonna have to struggle and take care of me, or if I live longer, I'm gonna have to take care of myself, or I won't have what I need. And so for me, even being able to say, I'm gonna take this one-time payment to do something I should that I think is so important for me, myself, but also for my family long term, is something that seems minor. Like people get it at their job and don't think twice about it. But for Black educators who have been underpaid, under rewarded, never got benefits, to
That's
take money and say, I'm going to think about my future for myself and also for my
Mhm.
family, I think it's one that for me, it's not, it doesn't seem innovative, but really to me it is, right? When we have never been given the opportunity. The other one I will flag is also schools that are being developed with African centeredness in mind.
Yes.
It has been a joy to discover there's all these sort of resistance schooling happening with young children. And that
Nice.
means that somebody is like, I know that my kids are not getting what they need to fully fulfill themselves as human beings of the African diaspora. And so this is not new. It was happening before the 60s, it was happening even during the whole desegregation. But these are schools that are started by, a lot of Black people, Black women, Black men, who are like, I know that my kids and the kids who look like my kids deserve better and deserve more. They deserve to fully have their whole culture centered. And so to see these African centered schools and being able to understand how they're functioning, right? Why did they get started? A lot of them get started as a form of resistance, right? A form of
Yes.
saying that education, the version of it that America has given us, is not good enough. It's actually harmful for us. And we're going to create something that we believe is going to help our children and help our community. And so to see them start, African center schools, maintain it even under these conditions of not having, the right budgets, not having all of it figured out, but knowing that they are leaning into the spirit and into the guidance of their people and their culture, and learning from others out, from in the continent and in the Caribbean, learning how we have to begin to cross boundaries that we have been separated by oceans, and that we can cross boundaries and connect with our people. I think
Yes.
it's one that has been such an amazing, I think it's an innovation that for me, I'm hoping I can be part of, continue to cultivate and continue to show that our outcome is not going to be a vocabulary item. Our outcome is going to be, how do we fully see ourselves as deserving of love in the deepest of ways, but deserving, as one of my friends just said this morning, of dreaming in a full freedom. And I think
Mm,
African center schools are allowing us to dream outside of the structure of white people, Eurocentric values, to dream about what do our kids really need to thrive to who they're supposed to be, and not what white people said they're supposed to be. So for me, I am seeing that kind of innovation happening, and I want to see it foster and continue to grow and really show itself. So I'm just my skin is just crawling from that brilliance of our people to continue to fight even under some brutal conditions.
yes, yes. And I know that you are fighting, fighting, fighting. I need to hear about, like, what are you working on right now? What research are you doing? What projects are you working on?
Oh gosh. So I'm trying to, I feel okay. There's so many, but I would say I feel like the two big things is going to be continue to address the policy issue. I think that when people hear black, they're like, well, what about those others? And I'm like, look, I care about people at large, but I love my people, and
That's
I
right.
want my people to get what they deserve and what was promised to them.
Yes.
And so I'm always going to continue to focus on the Black child agenda, and trying to show where are we seeing good pockets of progress for our people, whether it's around reparation issues, we study reparations, whether it's around even family medical leave, whether it's around even childcare subsidies, and whether that's increasing, or whether it's even around civil rights protection, where is it happening, right? So we're going to continue to discover, are there places where Black people are thriving, and policies seem to center Black people. We're going to find those out, and make it visible that even if you don't want Black people to get freedom, we're going to find those places and make it bigger. So that's one thing that we'll continue to march on. That we want to continue that focus on the Black child national agenda, and
Yes.
have it be like, look, you may not like hearing Black and Blackness, but that's who we are. And if you're uncomfortable, it is what it is.
That's right.
And then the other big thing that I'm really excited about is really, we're going to be launching what we call the Black Family Census Study. And
Mm,
and to me, it really came from the notion that, there's a lot census, the U.S. Census Bureau. I'm a national advisor, and so they collect a lot of great national data. But of course, I want data about that speaks for us by us, right? The census has, yeah, they have people, but how much do they really take our lens, take our hopes, our dreams, our experiences, our words? How much do they care about us as people? And so the Black Family Census is really about families with young children, and to understand how are they doing. So it'll be both a study, a survey, but it'll also be a diary, but it'll also be sort of a bi-directional focus groups and interviews to really understand, how are you doing? What are your
mm,
greatest joy, and what are your greatest concerns for you as a parent of a young child, for you as a family? Again, parent meaning like those who are caregivers, grandparents, all the adults in children's lives. What is your worst? What's your worry? But what is your joy? And then what should we be doing around policies, right? Because in the end of it, we don't ask Black families, what is your feeling about sort of this idea that your Black history will no longer be taught in certain places, that textbooks are changing. What do you think about these book bans? We ask a whole bunch of people, but we don't ask Black people when it's our books being banned. It's our history that's continued to be sort of told or untold or rewrite, revised, etc. And so being able to understand what matters to you during this time, during the most vulnerable years of your children's life, what is most of joy and what is most of concern, and what do you see as some of the potential solutions? And we're going to hopefully launch that census study in partnership with Gallup in February, and other partners like the National Black Child Development Institute, Child Trends, BU, and the National African American Center. So we want to be able to tell our story from our vantage point, particularly for our story for families with young children, because we need to be able to tell our story in the way that we want and not the way that's been curated by mostly a white-led, white-run organization.
When I tell you, you are such a gift. Like, you are such a gift to our community. My heart is singing. You know, I there was an older Black woman in the childcare space, and she told me, I was fortunate enough. We were in a kind of an organized meeting. She said, "You are what we've been fighting for," and I feel that with you. I'm just like, you are what the elders and the ancestors have been fighting for. So thank you so much for all the love and energy you pour into your work. I want to hear about how folks can support you, right? How can they support you? How can they support your work? How can they connect to your work?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, follow me on social media, but I would say between LinkedIn and some of the other social media I don't traffic as much in that as much anymore because of all the white supremacy stuff. But I do social media at Iheoma Iruka. I think that's important. Feel free to also look at the website at Equity Coalition FPG at unc.edu. So Google Equity Research Action Coalition at UNC, and you'll see the website, and you'll see. And I say, download the reports. We make the reports, got Black faces in it, joyful faces in it. Download the reports, but also look at them, right? And again, we try to create reports that are accessible and digestible for our people. So I encourage you to download the report. We have a data dashboard that we're launching, but it's kind of like in the beta form, but you can see it to see where are Black people thriving economically or socially or health wise. And so I would say just use the website and give us feedback, and feel free to follow me and give me, I need this, I need more of this. But also we want to engage with other organizations who are doing work around Black people, the Black diaspora in the US, because we do know that there are different experiences by Black people based on your language or your disability and your nativity status. Those intersectionality we know really matters. And so we'll continue to sort of do more work to unpack the richness of our community in ways that's often not discussed, like that some of us speak different kind of language systems, like African American English, or different language like French, right? So being able to sort of, I think about the intersection of our beautiful tapestry of a community. And so I say definitely feel free to follow me at Iheoma Iruka. And I mean, I hate to say Google me, but I'm probably the only Iheoma Iruka. So Googling should not be too hard to find me as well.
Absolutely. And you've done a lot of work. So there's a lot to find there and dig in. And that's how I found you, right? I was doing research as I was starting an early childhood nonprofit program, and I wanted to be research driven. I wanted it to understand deeply what was needed. And your research has been incredibly helpful throughout my work. So definitely Google and use that research in your advocacy work, in your, again, it's beyond early childhood. It's about family, it's about community. So I encourage everyone to look at your amazing work. The last question that I have for you is really about you. How do you sustain yourself in this work? You do a lot. You are out here for our children, okay? And how do you sustain yourself? How do you center yourself in joy and well-being in your own process?
Oh, thank you for asking that. I think just you even asking that question helps me. But I feel like I'm fortunate in that, number one, I get to get up and see the sun, right? So I get to move my body, and right, not everybody has this. I always remember myself of how much I have that others don't have. And so I feel like that's important. I have a strong family between my husband and my kids will always keep me right. Those kids will keep you right. And so I feel like I have such between my mom, my sister. So I feel like I have a really strong group of family who keep me grounded and remind me of what I do. But I also know that I have a plethora of colleagues and collaborators who I think trust me, and who believe in me, right? Because I think that for us to do the work that we do and the work that you do, Erica, you know that there are people who trust you, who value you, who push you even when you don't think that you're able to go further. And so I know that my well-being is because I live better because I'm doing it for my people. When people say you are better when you give to others, I think for me that's how I function. The more that I feel like, what more can I do for my people to make sure we have our freedom, that we have our voice, that we can be who we are supposed to be, the more I feel stronger, the more I feel alive. So for me, I don't think of my work as work. I think of my work as my personhood. But of course, I don't mind getting my hair done, getting my nails done, all that stuff, which keeps me nice and comfortable. But I know though that I am fortunate. I would say I am fortunate to be in this space, and that fortitude and that knowledge is what actually helps me. It gives me the joy, even sometimes the pain, but it gives me the joy to know that I'm doing this on behalf of my own community that I love dearly. And so for me, that sustains me, to be honest. I think there's many people who fought worse, right? Who have done way, way more. Think about Martin Luther King. Think about all of the leaders we have today. They do so much all the time that's unseen, unheard, unrewarded, unvalued, unrecognized. And I feel like the little bit I could do, I will do because I know they're doing way more than I am. So, but again, in the end of it, I try to take care of myself. I try to sleep my little 5, 6 hours and I'm good.
Well, again, you are doing so much. And not only are you doing so much, but your energy, your spirit, your essence, you really are you're so warm, you're so open, you're so willing to connect, you're deeply collaborative. So it's not just the work that you do, but it's also who you are and how you do it. That is such a gift. So thank you. And thank
Thank
your
you.
whole family, your whole community,
All of that. That's right.
cousins. We
That's
thank everybody for everything they pour into you and everything that you share with us.
Thank you. And thank you, Emily. Thank you for what you have done, you continue to do, and providing dance in the daily for us to just be able to exactly dance and find joy as we sort of work to continue to advance equity in many other ways. So just thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, again, this was Dancing in the Daily. What a wonderful conversation. We're going to have Dr. Iruka back for sure for another conversation. There's so much more that we can explore, especially in this space. We have a lot of work to do for our beautiful, gorgeous children in this world. And so thank you for holding space for the children.
Thanks.